You're listening to Contesting Wrestling. This is a podcast where we try to understand why people enjoy wrestling, why wrestling is a thing that you should do with your time. When I say people, I mean me, because I don't understand those things. But my co-hosts, who are also some of my closest friends that I've known for a very long time, they do understand these things. They understand them so hard, they have dedicated some percentage of their professional lives to wrestling. Whereas I'm just over here like, why even am I watching this right now? Why have I made these choices? So, if you're like me, hey, this should be interesting for you. And if you're like them, perhaps it'll give you a new perspective on what, right? Like if you're somebody who's tried to get your friends into wrestling and you're like, I don't understand why they're not into it. Maybe this will help you get some perspective on that. Or maybe you just don't listen to your friends and that's a thing that you need to deal with in your own time. My name is Evan Burke. I'm a writer. I'm on Twitter at Evan Burke, etc. You can follow me there for there's no wrestling there. So if you're a wrestling fan and you're here and you want to hear that from me, it's not going on. You can follow us at Contesting W, and there's all 24/7 wrestling going on that part. Anyway, kicking this over to my co-hosts for more introductions.
All right, well, my name is Dr. Diamondfire. I've been involved in wrestling for well over a decade now. I've done wrestling, commentary, ring announcing, a little bit of everything, like I like to say. I'm very happy to be on this podcast with everybody, and I hope you enjoy.
I'm Dr. Ben Abelson, professor of philosophy at Mercy College, a lifelong consumer of the product that is professional wrestling. And our other co-host.
Oh, I didn't realize your introduction was going to be so short, Ben. Usually you're the long-winded one. It is me, Katie Vella. I can be followed on Twitter at RefKatie, Katy. If you misspell it, you will not find me, so you should probably remember that. I've been a referee since 2017. I've been in wrestling since 2014. I've been a fan of wrestling since 2003. Captain Romance is the devil. Let's get started.
I just finished writing a paper last night, so I think I might be a little shorter on wind than usual. But
so
do my best
extra
here.
wind.
You should have ate more beans, then you'd have plenty of wind.
That's a deep cut, yes.
Because farts,
Yes.
get it?
The musical fruit and all.
So today, this is an episode that's been brewing pretty much since the beginning of this. Today we are covering one of the most well-known wrestlers ever. One of the only people who I really knew about before we started this podcast. We were talking about The Undertaker, who I would venture a guess, even if Hulk Hogan and The Rock and John Cena are more popular, I feel like there is a near universal awareness that The Undertaker is a guy who exists and is a wrestler.
And is liked.
Nobody who isn't in wrestling will say The Undertaker if you ask them name a pro wrestler. But if you say to them, have you heard of the pro wrestler The Undertaker? They'll all go, oh yeah, I mean, I know who The Undertaker is.
And like him, right? So I think maybe just as many people know who Hulk Hogan is, but everyone thinks The Undertaker is cool. And that is not the case for the Hulkster.
And I'm going to say, like, outside of what I have seen so far, both of The Undertaker and of wrestling in general, outside of, like, the modern era where I feel like people have really taken characters and the theatricality and stuff to a whole new level. So sort of like excising, maybe like the last 10 years of wrestling. I cannot imagine anybody executing a character better than this. Like, this seems like some of the shit that we watched today. I was like, yes, this is what you would fucking watch the WWE for. This is the whole point, right? Like,
I feel like Undertaker is kind of like the Vertigo comics of wrestling, where like Vince McMahon turned wrestlers into cartoon characters or comic book characters. And then Undertaker was like, well, what if we could make one of those really cool? And dark and interesting, and open the door for more characters like that. in the way it kind of like Alan Moore's original Run on Swamp Thing or something like that.
Well, and I mean, similar to like say an Alan Moore character or Sam or something like that. Like the Undertaker also has the advantage of being an archetypical figure that has existed in human fiction and myth since before written or probably even spoken language.
Right.
Like we were probably grunting to each other about the concept of death incarnate before there were words to really think. So he definitely locks into this like archetype. And it's cool because he's not. It seems like it's loose enough of a definition because he's not death necessarily,
Right.
and he's not a zombie, and he's not but he could be any of those things at any time. It's like it's just sort of there's just a big tent of death-related magic stuff.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about an Undertaker or, a mortician or something, and I mean, this kind of feeds into like stereotypes about them, I guess. But, people who spend that much time with death, you start to think like, well, maybe they have some kind of connection to death that goes beyond just their vocation. And I think it's those sorts of thoughts that lead into the Undertaker character. Like maybe he's really dead himself.
If you wanna know about people who have spent a lot of time with death, you look no further than Paul Bearer, the Undertaker's manager, who is a real licensed mortician. He maintained his mortician's license the entire time he was active as a wrestler. He always knew if he wanted to have something to fall back on, and there had been times in his career where he wasn't used for a year or two or whatever, and anytime that happened, he went back to running funeral homes. He said people would recognize him occasionally. They'd come in, and it would be a great icebreaker, which is part of the job of being a real Undertaker like that, is making the people comfortable. And then they look up, and there's Paul Bearer from TV. It's like, wait, you're really? And he's like, yes, come with me.
By the way, I didn't realize that Paul Bearer was one in a tradition of wrestlers named after punk rockers. I was reading the Mark Lanigan autobiography, and there was a guy named Paul Bearer in the scene.
I mean, it's just a takeoff on the Paul Bearers, the guys that carry caskets.
Right.
Yeah, I would think
He wasn't the first one.
I would think that was just. Yeah, but I would think that was just more of a coincidence. It's Paul Bearer. It's you
Possibly.
carry. That's the guy
I heavily
that
doubt
carry the
that when
caskets.
Vince McMahon and Bruce Pritchard and Pat Patterson were coming up with these names, they were looking into their vast knowledge of punk rock bands.
Probably not. But I mean, it was at the time when you had a Sting and you had a Sid Vicious.
This is true.
So
I will say I actually just realized this. One impression I've never had of The Undertaker, like one thing that does not in any way, shape, or form seem to be part of his character, is that he has a job as an Undertaker. Like, to me, it's just a title. There's no part of The Undertaker's character that makes me think, oh, he has a job.
No, yeah, it's just a title.
Well, you saw the, but he does have a workshop in which he makes caskets.
He did at that point in his career, at least.
As you see before the Yokozuna match. And he's building a special casket for Yokozuna and
That
all
struck
that
me
stuff.
as just something he does for himself. I didn't get a professional vibe off of that. Like, I got that as just like, oh, that's where the Undertaker...
That's just in his house.
Yeah.
That's his basement.
I mean, the thing was, everyone had a job.
When they first brought out The Undertaker, he was more like he was an Undertaker. They dropped a lot of the elements like that pretty quickly. But what they would do things like he'd be backstage getting interviewed, and either him or Paul Bearer would start measuring the body of the interviewer for the casket just while he's trying to conduct the interview. When he would have squash matches very early on, when he would do the tombstone pile driver and pin the guy, then they'd bring out a body bag and wrap the guy in a body bag and carry them to the back. They dropped those pretty quickly within the first couple of years for the reasons that you already said. The Undertaker's character, it's like, it's specific enough that you have a picture in your mind just by hearing the phrase The Undertaker, but it's nebulous enough that it could be an Undertaker, or it could be Death Incarnate, or a zombie, or a wizard, or whatever the Undertaker needs to be at that point.
When he first came out, he was another in the long line of wrestlers who had other jobs.
That was the theme of the day.
Yeah,
like, all the
had-
wrestlers had jobs.
The Big Boss Man was a cop.
Doink was a clown.
IRS was, a tax guy. Accountant. No, not an accountant. The
Repo
other
Man
guy.
took your
Auditor.
stuff.
Yeah. Repo Man took your stuff. And so I wanted to watch one of the Undertaker had a series of body bag matches. One was with the Ultimate Warrior, which we were talking about doing for the premium, but I think I want to go with something else. And
we had the
Evan having to
premium
watch.
list. We'll look it over.
I would like to do a Paul Bearer episode one day because I think he is my favorite non-wrestling character I've ever seen.
Paul Bearer is incredible. How he kept that voice going the whole time, I'll never know.
Every moment is here. Every moment the camera is on him is a moment I am filled with joy. Like I see Paul Bearer and I'm like, all right, I'm gonna have a good time right now.
He adds to every scene.
No matter how stupid it is, like even we'll get to the beginning of the Undertaker versus Undertaker match. Like Paul Bearer makes that whole ridiculous circus.
So
that
in this episode, we're looking specifically at some of the matches from earlier on in the Undertaker's career. We're not doing like we're going to do 2 episodes and 2 premium episodes on this. Even with that, we had to pare down the Undertaker's career very significantly in order to create some kind of context for what we're doing. And Ben and Katie put this together, which is they've done a good job. These matches here that we're doing today take a snapshot of about a year in the life of The Undertaker and what he represented after he really got over, but, before he was like one of the main guys.
And boy, these are some doozy of matches.
Well, this was right at the time when Doc and I were pretty much first watching wrestling, like less than a year into our wrestling watching.
We both started independently of each other mid-92. The first match is versus the Giant Gonzalez at WrestleMania 9 in 1993.
Which was the first WrestleMania that I watched as it happened, that I bought on pay-per-view and watched. You too, right, Doc?
I first bought WrestleMania 10, actually. I saw this one afterwards on videotape. Business was kind of down. They didn't want to try and do a more gigantic stadium than they'd ever done or something like that. But they didn't want to try and do like a small place because attendance was so down. So instead, they went with a gimmick place. They went with Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas, Nevada. And it's very divisive. Some people think this was really stupid. They think it looked dumb. Other people think it was a really good act. And the whole show, they had like the Caesar and Cleopatra were there. Bobby Heenan came out on like a camel sitting backwards, all, Randy Savage was carried out by several people, someone feeding him grapes.
Supposedly Vestal virgins. And I remember my mom watching with me like, I don't think they're virgins.
I do want to note that, Doc, you've told me this. This is JR's first major appearance.
Yeah.
Yes, he had just signed with the WWF after, he had already done commentary for many years in the territories and for WCW and so on.
He wasn't new to wrestling.
And,
I meant as far as the WWF went.
If you want the full story of that, I refer you to his excellent first book. His excellent second book is out now, but he talks about it a lot in his excellent first book. This was his first event. His style was very unlike what the WWF commentators at the time had. And I thought the commentary was good on this match, but they definitely talk over each other a bit. Like JR definitely barrels through Bobby Heenan and Randy Savage a couple of times when he should have laid out a little, but that's just me nitpicking a little bit. No. Randy Savage on commentary is gold every time he says anything.
Okay, 2 things. One, I'm actually really glad for the context of the fact that this took place at Caesar's Palace, because I was just like, oh, they did an ancient Rome WrestleMania one year, apropos of nothing.
At the Royal Rumble, they had the actor that played Caesar come to the ring with full fanfare to announce that the winner of the Royal Rumble would get a World Championship match at Caesar's Palace at WrestleMania in Las Vegas.
Okay.
Very schlocky, but very Vegas.
And I will save this for when we get to the end of this match, but Randy Savage says something that is one of my favorite things I've ever heard a commentator say. Okay. So I'll save that for the end.
Before that, going to the setting of things that Doc very well laid out here, Undertaker's entrance with the fucking vulture is one of his coolest entrances ever.
And the cool mix of imagery. Yeah. Too, the death imagery and the ancient Roman imagery was very dissonant.
You have Undertaker coming out in broad daylight, which should really work against his mystique. but they made it work by just amping up that mystique with the Vulture.
I was just waiting for the Vulture to just like take off, and it's just like I don't think he's coming back.
So the Giant Gonzalez, he had been around in WCW. He was El Gigante. He was during this part of Undertaker's career. They were just coming up with a different monster to fight him, month after month. It was Kamala, then it was Giant Gonzalez. Eventually, it was Yokozuna. Giant Gonzalez debuts at the Royal Rumble, beating up Undertaker and eliminating him. And as a little kid, I was like, "Holy shit!" Like, first of all, this guy is enormous. They sold him as 8 feet tall. I think he was like 7'7" or something. And
at that Royal Rumble, they kept showing wide shots of the ring to show how, like, almost comically larger he was than all of the people in the stands, all of the other wrestlers. And then finally, how much larger he was than The Undertaker.
And he's dressed like, if anyone has seen Attack on Titan, he looks like the Beast Titan, like the hairy one.
I had that same thought.
He's wearing a full bodysuit, like a muscle print bodysuit, but also part of the...
It has butt cheeks.
It also has like hair going along the sides of it, but it's not actual hair. It's all part of the print.
I'd like to make an observation about that. When he first comes out at the Royal Rumble, he's wearing a slightly different suit, which had large furry shoulders.
Okay, I thought there was
and
real
a large
furry.
Yeah, there's a large furry band around his waist going down, covering like his whole crotch as though they were tights. At WrestleMania, it's as though he had trimmed all of that, so he just had a printed strip of hair on his crotch and on the shoulders. As the months went by, he had another suit or two with longer and longer hair, as though they cut it off and it was growing back. And very few people noticed this. I always noticed it, and I thought it was a great touch, because he was only around about a year.
And he had butt cheeks.
Yes, he had butt cheeks.
He has butt cheeks imprinted onto the gear, like butt cheeks, just naked butt cheeks, and it's all I see the entire match. It's like I'm watching the match, I'm seeing everything that's happening, but just butt cheeks the whole time.
I would love to see more novelty jumpsuits in wrestling. I'm just gonna put that out there. That would be a great way to attract more fans. Is more anatomically accurate novelty jumpsuits,
like Batman's nipples.
Yeah. Also, more butts. Just anything that's like butts. Butts are great. That's it. That's my observation. I thought I started that like I had a joke.
The problem with Giant Gonzalez was that he was terrible.
Yes.
He is not good.
He is
not
horribly
entertaining
uncoordinated.
to watch.
Wrestling promoters shit themselves when they saw him because he was so tall. He was a basketball player nationally for Argentina. Not exactly one of the basketball hotbeds in the world. So they thought, oh no, he's a great athlete. No, he's not a great athlete. He's 7'7". He just had to put his arm up and he could defend anything. That's the problem.
The match isn't as bad as I remember it being, though.
It's not good,
no,
though.
It's not good.
It's not the worst match I've ever seen, but I will say he is in the running for the worst selling I've ever seen. He's like really every time like there is a particular artificiality to his flailing.
Yeah.
That is just it's like somebody making fun of a wrestler.
Oh yeah, it's bogus. It's complete bogus.
Especially when Undertaker doesn't actually make contact on some of those chops.
Oh my god! Like,
see, this is a testament to how good the Undertaker was at that point. They trusted him to tell the story that they wanted to tell and have, matches that the crowd would at least accept as fine within the context of their stories, with Gonzalez and with a lot of guys like Gonzalez.
I think it was actually a great story, honestly. Like, the cool, unique thing about this match and about The Undertaker is you have him going up against this giant, and it's The Undertaker who's no-selling. Right? At the beginning of the match, the giant clobbers him and does no damage. Then Undertaker starts fighting back, and Giant Gonzalez sells. And eventually he gets the advantage. But for the whole match, and even at the end, even after he finds a way to take The Undertaker down, he comes back, and he's just so completely unstoppable, indestructible. There was never a character like that, especially not a babyface.
And I will say, The Undertaker is part of what is really cool about watching him wrestle is that he is a shockingly graceful man for somebody his size. And yet, a lot of the times the matches he's in, it still feels like I'm watching like the, an 80s style match, like a Hogo of just like big stompy punches and then like one or two throws. And like, once again, I'm not that I need it to be like a crazy high flying thing or anything like that, but there's times where it's just not very dynamic.
This match
which is
all
frustrating
big stompy
because
punches.
he is very dynamic. Yes, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, he's got, in these early matches, he's got all of these great little zombie mannerisms, like the way he stops and turns around, and the sit-up, of course, is the classic thing.
Oh, yeah.
And, it's way more gimmick back then than it would be later. But he does it all so well. It's just something that could be so completely stupid. That character could have just been an absolute failure if the guy playing it wasn't so freaking good at it.
Yeah, can you imagine if they gave it to like Sid or something,
or Brian
love
Lee, the guy who's the fake
Lee,
Undertaker?
Thankfully, Sid was Sid, which is another entertaining spectacle in and of itself in a completely different way.
Yeah, but like most people, if like handed this character, would have failed. The Undertaker took this. It's like, hey, you're kind of an undead wizard dead guy. Don't sell anything, because don't sell anything could be a death sentence in and of itself. But no, he took it, he ran with it, he made it work. He evolved it over the years. He's still trying to evolve it over the years. He's less successful now than he used to be, but he's still trying, man.
So,
well, that's what's really remarkable. I have to say, something that I find really remarkable about his performance is that characters in general, we talk a lot about the difference between like comedy characters and wrestling characters on the podcast, partially because they're very related, partially because that's just, I don't know, something I can talk about with some level of knowledge / possible authority. And I feel like when a comedy character doesn't work, it is usually because it lacks specificity. Thank you for that. The word that Ben said. And it is because a lot of times people will not have the character game very well worked out, or like they won't understand, like when you're writing a comedy sketch and you're getting notes on it, a lot of times, what you have to dig deeper with is like, why is this idea funny? And you have to try to find the kernel of it. So the fact that he really makes this work with a very general character, with a character that just like, well, you're sort of death and you're sort of this and you're sort of...
You got a cool hat.
Yeah, like it's all of this shit that like it shouldn't work, really. It should be too general and broad to really make sense and connect. But you're right, he embodies the physicality so perfectly, and then contrasts it with like he's this huge, dark, imposing figure who then can move with greater agility than any of the other guys his size. It's really remarkable.
So I learned something as a child watching this, which is what chloroform is, because I didn't know that before. And that's how Giant Gonzalez is able to take down the Undertaker, is by he has a towel drenched in chloroform, or at least that's what the announcers tell us it must be. He knocks him unconscious with the chloroform, gets disqualified because the ref sees him do it, and then they cart the Undertaker out, but he comes back.
I love the image of Paul Bearer trying to hold the Undertaker back, and the Undertaker, in the first time he ever defied Paul Bearer at all, just moving his arm to move Paul Bearer away, like, no, we're not done here. And then he gets in the ring, starts throwing clotheslines, and finally causes Giant Gonzalez to do what I will generously describe as take one bump. And that popped the crowd.
That's, yeah.
So the chloroform spot. This was so stupid. Not because the chloroform spot in itself is stupid. The chloroform spot works very well in small venues where you get chloroform and you dilute it, or something that has ether in it, and you make it so it won't actually knock someone out by diluting it, or just getting the smell on a piece of cloth. And then you bring it in the ring, and the heel hits the babyface with it, and everybody in the small venue, even if you can't quite see what's going on, you can smell the damn ether. So they're in an open air arena in Las Vegas. Nobody's smelling anything, because that's the thing. You don't just say it's on the towel. You actually put something on the towel.
Right.
So the people in the venue, it helps. That's what it happens. And that's why then the announcers can be like, can you smell that? It's like, those announcers couldn't smell anything.
So
They were outdoors. It's so stupid.
I think this match is interesting in order to show Evan a different kind of side of the business and how matches were presented in order to drive other kinds of business within the company. Because the point of this match was to make them both look strong, right? To make Undertaker look really strong, that he can fight, that he can stand up to this kind of monster. In the end, he finally gets Giant Gonzalez off his feet, which takes him until after he comes back after the chloroform. At the same time, Giant Gonzalez only got knocked off his feet, right? He didn't get pinned. He didn't get beaten decisively. And this drove the house show matches between the two of them for the next year. Because even if you didn't think Giant Gonzalez was any good, and I'm pretty sure even as a little kid, I realized he wasn't very good, I still wanted to see the fucking 8-foot giant live at the house show. And I went to the Garden on this run of house shows in like June. And it wasn't just for that. I think there were a couple other things drawing me, but it was definitely exciting to see the fucking giant. Brett wrestled Rob Backlund. That was the same house show where Shawn Michaels wrestled Razor Ramon when they were both still heels. Lex Luger and Mr. Perfect, just a whole bunch of good stuff on that show. But I also got to see Giant Gonzalez, and they did the same kind of match where Gonzalez lost by DQ. But they ran these house show matches up until August, up until SummerSlam, when Undertaker finally pinned Giant Gonzalez on TV. And
Did you get a close look at his butt cheeks?
I got a much closer look at Bam Bam Bigelow's butt cheeks, actually, because
Really?
I was like 6 rows back from the front. My friend Will's dad got us really good tickets, and we ran right up to the aisle whenever the wrestlers came out. And Bam Bam Bigelow and Tatanka fought in the aisle for a while. So we were up front, and I reached out because I wanted to touch Bam Bam Bigelow's tattooed flaming head, but I got a whole handful of his ass instead. So
That's great, Ben.
story.
Don't do that, people. At the time, it was actually a lot more acceptable to try and reach over the guardrail.
Don't do
Yeah, I
that.
was like
though.
8.
These days, it's like don't do that, because
They get so upset. It's just like when you go to like a show on Broadway and you try to touch the actors, and then like
Yes.
and security is like, "Sir, you need to leave." And I'm like, "I fucking paid $500 for this ticket." That's not true. I've never have paid $500 for a ticket. I just snuck in and tried to touch people.
They're also, if you've ever touched a wrestler's arm or whatever, they're slimy as fuck.
Oh, they're
Very gross.
they're moist.
That shit is gross.
moist.
But yeah, chloroform is like it's like
Moist.
quicksand, where I feel like I saw it in pop culture all the time growing up and thought it would be around a lot more, and it doesn't seem to exist. Before we move on to the next match, this match ends, and then Randy Savage says, I'm not going to try to do the voice, says, "Gonna have to change Giant Gonzalez's name to What Happened." Which
gonna have to change.
When you first hear
Giant
that-
Gonzalez's name to What Happened.
And when you first hear that, it's like, it's not necessarily like the funniest thing or the dumbest or any of that, but if you keep thinking about it, it will start deleting other information from your brain. Because it's just really, it's like, think about, like, because he is confused as to what happened, he will now have to change his very name to What Happened, because that is the only way he could express how confused he is as to what happened here today.
Randy Savage is a reincarnation of Lao Tzu, so get over it.
Nobody's here to argue that.
But,
Nobody's here to say anything against that.
also, before we move on, I want to say the real tragedy of Giant Gonzalez in the WWF is that, like, he had been in WCW. Like, they knew he was bad.
Yeah, they knew.
You know.
They had no excuse.
I wanted to.
I mean,
Yeah.
No, what's
I
up,
just want
What's
to point out one little thing. When Undertaker gets taken out before he comes back, the crowd, pretty much the whole fucking crowd, chants for Hogan.
Right, Hogan had just come back and he was in the house, and the look on Giant Gonzalez's face when he hears it is like, oh yeah, here comes that Hogan money next, right?
And that's really interesting considering what happens later that night at WrestleMania 9, which we'll tell Evan about on some future episode.
That's a whole other story, completely unrelated, yes.
So, Undertaker conquers another monster in Giant Gonzalez at SummerSlam.
Yep.
And the next big feud, he gets involved with Lex Luger, who's feuding with Yokozuna at Survivor Series. And this leads to the casket match between Undertaker and Yokozuna at the Royal Rumble for the WWF title. And,
with the giant casket.
With the double wide, double deep casket that he makes specially for Yokozuna. That entire video package before this match is just incredible. With all Paul Bearer is amazing. The Christmas themed one where instead of rest in peace, he
ho.
It's somehow actually sinister and not just hilarious and ridiculous.
Honestly, the Undertaker as Santa Claus feels like a very unexplored theme that they could have fucking gotten a lot out of that, because it's a brilliant concept. Could have been the greatest Christmas episode
How
ever.
straight-faced he always kept everything is what made it work. Like, there are legendary stories of people trying to get the Undertaker to crack in the ring, and like almost nobody ever succeeded at all, because why would you succeed?
In the video package, they're jumping around doing a bunch of clips. There's a guy with a tennis racket.
Jim Cornette?
Yeah, that's
that
Jim Cornette. At the time, he was very much active as a manager. The WWF brought him in to do promos because they wanted Yokozuna, and they wanted Yokozuna to be managed by Mr. Fuji. But Mr. Fuji always did promos in like broken English. They wanted a real professional promo guy for their champion Yokozuna, so they brought in Jim Cornette and called him their American spokesperson. So he would cut his, just mile-a-minute Dynamite promos that were world title class. And that's Jim Cornette for you.
Yeah, and so it created this whole dog and pony show for Yokozuna. He didn't just have one manager. He had a manager and a hype man. And then 10 dudes to do his bidding, as we found out later in this match. I just want to say Yokozuna's acting in this whole thing is fantastic.
It's incredible. His faces, his like Looney Tunes-esque facial reactions.
Him taking three full steps back and then falling on his bottom is just amazing.
And
he slipped on some butterscotch.
Right.
He could still really move at this point too. You see him just like very
really
nimble
cool.
at various points.
It's really cool to watch a match between two guys who do not look like they will be graceful at all, and then are like, shockingly graceful and fluid in there. Yeah, Yokozuna can really move around.
Before Yokozuna's weight got completely out of control. And believe it or not, this is before Yokozuna's weight got completely out of control. His agility was incredible. The early Yokozuna squash matches, which we watched a couple of, I believe, much earlier in this podcast, he had the balance of a sumo wrestler. Because if you don't know, the object of sumo is to get any part of your opponent's body other than their feet to touch the ground. So the main defense in sumo is simply not falling over. That's why sumo wrestlers train so hard to have such low centers of gravity. And Yoko could bend so far backwards that the tip of that long ponytail he has could brush the mat and then lean back forwards, doing his I'm almost gonna topple teeter-totter routine, which he did better than anybody else has ever done in the history of wrestling. And then when he finally would bump, it had the gravity of somebody taking down a killer whale or something. And once Yokozuna's on his back, he's vulnerable. It's the only time he's vulnerable.
And like, this is Yoko in his peak too, before he got, too big.
Yes, he eventually gained another, I want to say 300 pounds, and it was not good. I don't necessarily want to cover it on the podcast. Now. I'll show you a clip of him at his largest. He just couldn't get it under control. And like, this isn't a question of like, oh, I gained a little weight, body shaming. Like, he was a great athlete at 400 or 500 pounds.
He was an incredible athlete at 400, 500.
He was very addicted to food.
Yeah, at 800 pounds, it was too late. He was in the process of losing weight when he died, but, he yo-yoed back and forth, hundreds of pounds in either direction, and it was just too much. It was just too much.
But yeah, his mannerisms were great because they sold The Undertaker so well. Like one of my favorite parts is when he slams Undertaker's head into the steps, and Undertaker just does the hair flip and turns at him, and fucking Yoko looks like he shits himself.
Yeah.
It's fantastic.
The whole story of Yokozuna up until this point is nobody could get one up on him physically. Lex Luger could knock him out because he had a surgically implanted steel plate in his forearm from when he was in a motorcycle accident.
And the same was
but
true for
Yoko
Undertaker.
was intimidated by The Undertaker. He was actually scared of The Undertaker, and that's what made the match work so well. That they both sold that so well, regardless of any moves that they did. And that's really a big part of the art of pro wrestling at the time. If you're wrestling 6 times a week, you can't do those moves. You will die. But if you could do this every night, the people will be happy.
And it really is a performance. Like you said, I didn't even notice really that it wasn't that active of a match between the two of them, just because it's they're selling really well. There's a lot of chemistry.
So I pointed this out to Doc as we were watching the matches, because we watched Gonzalez first and then Yoko second. Gonzalez is terrible at doing almost nothing. Yoko is the king of doing almost nothing.
That's very good.
And they're both not doing many moves at all, but Yoko's doing it really well and Gonzalez is doing it terrible.
That's why I'm saying the stuff about Yokozuna, it's not like, oh, he was fat. It's like, no, there's no problem with being fat. If you're going to be fat, be fat. Yokozuna was addicted to eating, and he gained another several hundred pounds until he died. And that is a thing that can happen, and it happened to Yoko.
I was actually listening to Cornette talk about it. They sent him to rehab.
They did, yeah.
He
repeatedly.
He faked his way through it, and
they kept trying to put him and Doc told me this story. They kept trying to put him and another guy on diets,
Vader.
and they just sneak out and eat together.
Vader.
Yeah, they sent him and Vader together to try and develop better eating habits, and they would sneak out in the middle of the night and go to Burger King and order several value meals each. And yeah, it's an addiction.
It really is, man. I've done a fair amount of drugs in my life and had various issues and stuff. And my relationship with food has been harder to deal with than pretty much anything else. In that regard,
agreed,
because
motherfucking Charlie sent us a 5-pound bag of Sour Patch Kids.
Oh God,
He might as well have tried to kill me.
yeah. Oh Jesus.
I can't not eat the Sour Patch
Oh yeah.
Kids.
Yeah, you're a big candy guy.
No, I'm way more addicted to that than I have been to anything else.
For me, it's white flour. That's anything that's like baked goods, pasta, anything
Pizza.
that's bready, that anything that you eat a bunch of and then feel really awful because it's expanding, but then that awfulness destroys your consciousness briefly, so you get to forget about the human the suffering that is existence for a little while. Yeah.
Sometimes Evan just wakes up in the middle of the night and grabs a measuring cup and an open bag of flour and just goes to town.
He gives the middle finger to the sign on the side of the bag of flour that says "Flour is raw, do not eat."
I asked you guys to not share that, but here we are. And then
Look, Evan, this is actually an intervention. We're going to need you to sit down and listen to us for a minute.
Hey, Evan, you remember recently we went to that Italian restaurant with our friends and they were getting various stuff and we were sitting next to each other and we both looked at the menu and it was like, oh, the big bowl of pasta. Just bring me the big bowl of pasta. And they brought us each the big bowl of pasta and it was great.
Oh, it was so good. It was so good. Well, because also I
so good.
Well, I mean that, Evan, that's just because they wouldn't let you order the bowl of raw flour. Let's be real here.
I mean, they did after I killed the waiter.
You tried.
Jesus.
Look, it's
Speaking
an
of
addiction.
He's with Hobarth now.
Speaking of annihilating your consciousness.
Yes.
Well, no, wait, Evan, what do you want to say?
Here, all right. So one of the most overused words in pop culture today is the word epic, right? I try not to use it a whole lot. It's very overused. But this Undertaker shit is truly epic in a way that I don't think I've ever, I don't know if the WWE ever managed to hit these heights again, but
they haven't. The end
of this match and the beginning of the next one, it would have destroyed my brain when I was 10. If I had seen this shit when I was 10, this podcast wouldn't exist because I would have been a wrestling fan.
I think now you kind of
Right?
understand. Yeah, like
So all these guys at the end of this match start coming in. They don't all come in at once. A couple at a time, more and more guys come in and attack
I have
the
the
Undertaker.
full list.
Okay, give us them in order as they came in.
I called them the
Crush,
gallery of forgotten chumps.
Who's now Evil Crush.
Yes, the gallery.
Well, some
Do
of them
not
are
say
crazy.
chumps in regards to Bam Bam
Or
Bigelow.
Yeah.
fucking Tenru. They have Kabuki
get
and
Richie
Tenru.
Tenru.
Diesel, thank you very much,
Diesel, Bam Bam
is out
Bigelow,
there.
Adam Bomb, like ADAM Bomb.
Both members of Chronic, the future tag team Chronic.
Yes. Jeff Jarrett and the Head Shrinkers, Samu and Fatu. Fatu, who would one day be Rikishi.
Yeah, years later. Right, so they all attack the Undertaker. It's like 5 of them attack the Undertaker, and Taker beats them all away, and another 5 come in, and finally all of them together. But none of it matters until they get the urn away from Paul Bearer. Once they get the urn away from Paul Bearer and
green
open
smoke
it, and
comes out of it.
a bunch of green smoke comes out, the Undertaker's power fades away, and the beating is finally effective. But still, they open the casket and let Yokozuna just kick the Undertaker into the casket, and they close it. And Bam Bam gets right up on top of it.
Yeah.
Gotta love Bam Bam.
And then, so Yoko has won. He's defeated the Undertaker in a casket match. Who thought that was even possible? I mean, going into this match, you got to understand from the little kid fan point of view, sometimes they use the phrase the immovable object against the irresistible force. It really felt like that in this case. Like, who could possibly win this match? How could Taker possibly beat Yokozuna? How could Yokozuna possibly beat Taker? And we got an answer to that. He had to hire 10 guys to beat him down, get the urn, spill the urn, and then they were able to put him in the casket. And then it was like, fuck, because the only other casket match we had seen before this was against Kamala. And when he put Kamala in the casket, Kamala was gone. I mean, he came back eventually, I think, as a babyface.
Yeah, he came back. He came back pretty quickly, but he was gone for a while.
It's like, what happens when the Undertaker gets put in a casket? And we got an answer to that, too. As they roll the casket out to the aisle, and then up on the screen, we get some crazy fucking shit. We get an image of the Undertaker in the casket, and this amazingly overwrought piece of dialogue that comes out of him.
Which I couldn't believe that I was hearing this, and like, once again, everything he says, like, it doesn't mean anything. It just sounded really cool. But I was like,
spirit of the Undertaker is in all mankind.
As he ascends into the heavens or
but I
some
was like,
shit.
this is fucking ostensibly children's entertainment. Like, holy shit.
Yes. Like, this is what Bray Wyatt is trying to do a lot of the time. And
Yes.
I love Bray Wyatt, and I think at time when Bray Wyatt is great, he's brilliant, but he ain't the Undertaker.
So he's like, I will not rest in peace. And as Katie was saying, there's like some lightning flashes on the screen, and then just a silhouette of his body that rises up, and as it rises up past the top of the screen, the Undertaker rises above the screen.
And we can only assume that he's ascending into heaven like Jesus.
Yes, right. And he really is the fucking Jesus of the WWF.
Well, the last match, as we watch his resurrection, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves here, but yeah, very much so.
I will say, just on the note about Bray Wyatt, from what I have seen of Bray Wyatt, comparing him to the Undertaker, like, I feel like Bray Wyatt is a gifted comedic actor who is also a wrestler, and like can sort of inhabit those characters, but sort of approaches it maybe more with an acting sort of idea or attitude. And whereas the Undertaker, like, I don't think he could. I mean, who knows if he could really do anything else or embody any other character like this? But I feel like he just is the Undertaker. Like, he just is this guy.
The furthest he comes from that is in the turn of the 2000s when he becomes Biker the Undertaker, and that's because everybody had more realistic gimmicks. And he's like, well, what if I wasn't an undead zombie wizard? Then I'd be kind of a rock and roll biker gang member, and it worked. Because that's who he was too. And then when it came time to have character again, he put the dead man back into it, and it was fine. He knew what he was doing. That's what I mean by he keeps evolving.
Speaking of rock and roll biker characters, Mr. Brian Lee, who would later become Chains.
Yes. Oh, hold on. Before we get to Brian Lee, one more thing about this match with Yokozuna that really pissed me off when I was a kid. I was not yet buying the WWF pay-per-views. I started doing that with WrestleMania 10, and I didn't look back. I would save up my allowance and all that. It was fine. You know, my parents gave me food. Otherwise, it's not like I needed the money. So the next weekend, I would get accustomed to getting the results on WWF Superstars, like the exact results, because they'd give the results. You'd find out what happened if you didn't watch the pay-per-view. You couldn't go online. I mean, technically you could, but it was 1994. I wasn't online. And they didn't have a full episode of Superstars. They had Todd Pettengill, who was hosting Superstars, show a few matches, show a few clips, show a few things that happened previously, but he would not say what happened at the Royal Rumble. He kept saying the replay is available for pay-per-view on Tuesday or Wednesday, one of the days in the middle of the week, back when they had to schedule that. But he kept teasing that the finish of the title match was insane, and he couldn't tell you what it was. And he didn't. He didn't say what the end of the title match was. He didn't say what the finish of the Royal Rumble was, other than that it was crazy unique, which it was. And I've left that weekend like I still don't know what happened at the pay-per-view, and they told me the next week.
They used to do that. I was watching Primetime Wrestling from 1987, and they wouldn't tell you the end of the Hogan-Andre match for like several weeks after it aired.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that was probably a pretty effective technique to get most people to do that. But then, yes, if you were in a position where you could not get the pay-per-view, it would just haunt you. That's it.
I didn't have the cable television. Yeah. Then one of my mom's friends got wind of it and was like, "Well, if you pay the pay-per-view fees, you can come over and watch the show." And I'm like, "Okay."
I used to go to my grandma
every couple of months.
I used to go to my grandma's place, which was only a couple blocks away. That's where I would order them.
Yeah, cool.
I think that also has a lot to do with me stopping watching wrestling in the Attitude Era. Is that like I didn't want to bother going to someone's house on Monday night because I was out, with Evan and other people doing drugs.
Good times. Good times. Yeah.
Eating flour.
Well, no, that's now. I had to replace the drugs with food.
Yeah.
That's how aging works. When I was younger and like I don't know, almost 100 pounds lighter than I am now. That was all just drugs.
It's a true story.
Yeah, not 50 pounds lighter.
Cigarettes were a big.
Oh yeah. I was $1.80 when I quit, and I'm $2.30 now. But also I don't smoke anymore, so it's worth it. But
also, you will eat lots of flour now,
by the spoon
with some butter on it. I'm not an animal.
He doesn't eat it with a spoon. He literally digs the 1 cup measuring cup in and he pours it into his mouth.
No, he just said with some butter.
Yeah, he spreads butter on it.
Leslie Nielsen.
Wait, hold on before we get to Leslie Nielsen. So in 1994,
Leslie Nielsen.
In 1994, at the Undertaker gets put in the casket and actually disappears. They really never do long-term angles like this anymore, where the guy's actually gone. I think he was getting married and maybe like having his wife was having their first kid or something like that. He
was getting married and he needed some time off, so they gave it to him. He missed WrestleMania that year.
So yeah, he missed. I mean, for all the wrestlers who complain that they never get time off, I mean, the Undertaker, who was one of their main commodities, they found a way to give him time off. So I don't know if.
Yeah, there's a lot of contradictory stuff.
Way.
Here's the thing, there are a lot of guys who say, especially in the 80s and the 90s, if I asked for any time off, I'd get fired. But there are also a bunch of guys that went, I asked for time off and they just gave me some time off and then I came back and things were fine. And the first group, it's like, well, did you ever ask? And they're like, no. And then the second group is like, no, you gotta ask.
It's like
Vince respects somebody who treats themselves like superstars. If you treat yourself like a nobody, he'll treat you like a nobody. And he probably doesn't want you on his show in the first place.
When CM Punk was asking for time off, they were already like into WrestleMania season too. It was, so I think like the timing might make a lot of the difference.
Oh, for sure. But in this case, The Undertaker missed Royal Rumble through SummerSlam.
And so
he was at the Rumble and SummerSlam, but he missed WrestleMania. And the whole WrestleMania build, WrestleMania 10. He missed WrestleMania 10 at the Garden.
So all summer long, we didn't hear anything from him for months, from like January until June or something like that. And then all summer long, beginning at the beginning of the summer, the $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase, started to say that he had contacted The Undertaker and he was going to bring The Undertaker back. And so it was like, oh, did Undertaker sell out? Because they kept doing these stories with Ted DiBiase where baby faces would sell out to the $1 Million Man and join his corporation. So, and eventually on Shawn Michaels' Heartbreak Hotel interview show, which was great, one of my favorite, one of their little interview segment things, they really don't put in the time and energy that they used to. They used to make a whole set for like the barber shop or the Heartbreak Hotel or whatever. Nowadays, it's just like something on the fucking Titantron in the ring.
Or in the ring.
Yeah. Anyway, so he brings out what looks the fucking like The Undertaker.
Which...
It's a pretty good imitation,
Can you
yes.
see Ted DiBiase standing there in the ring next to the heart-shaped bed, all the neon lights being like, come on up here, Undertaker, really makes it seem like he's about to fuck the Undertaker in front of everybody.
Yes, it's a bit pornographic.
Yes. The Heartbreak Hotel is a very close simulacrum to the rooms in the red light district in Amsterdam, for sure. Don't ask me why I know that.
Complete with the 7-foot tall guy standing in the background, massaging his fists in case something goes wrong.
Exactly.
You
don't see them. They're in like the back room.
Right, they're in the back.
In this video package that leads up to this, too, there's like this brief supercut of like just normal people in the world being like, did you see that guy? Who was that? Oh no, that was the Undertaker.
Right.
And I was like, this is the least realistic thing I've ever seen in the WWE.
The little girl
Yeah.
who's like, where did you see the Undertaker?
I saw him on the slide outside. He was
love
going
that.
down. She was my favorite one. She was my favorite one.
It was great. I was just like, normos are not fucking talking about the Undertaker like this.
It's between her and the ladies, like in what was it, like an antique store or like
jewelry shop or
something that, and one of them was like, he sure was big, and the other one just nonchalantly was like, oh yeah, that was the Undertaker.
That was what made me be like, this is a wrestling fantasy right here. This is more than anything else.
This is every part of that segment of just the normal people they got in there was fantastic.
They dripped these things out on their weekly television for a long time. They were very judicious about it, letting most of it stew in the fans' minds. And then
it should have been even more out there. They should have done more of them.
Oh my god, they could have done so many. But
they could have done one where it's like in a bar and it's like, oh yeah, I picked up the Undertaker last night and took him back to a seedy hotel and he gave me a dicking.
A dicking, you say? So eventually,
This place,
they
the
decided,
Heartbreak Hotel. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Eventually, they decided that, Jack Tunney, the president of the WWF, decided they had to get the bottom to this. So they contracted famed detective Leslie Nielsen to find the Undertaker.
Beautiful.
Now, they didn't show on SummerSlam that after the vignettes of people saying I saw the Undertaker, they filmed a series of short, like, police squad pun style vignettes that they would then show every week of Leslie Nielsen trying to get clues to find the Undertaker.
Just real quick, for any of our listeners born after 1990, I'm gonna say,
Yeah, maybe.
ish, something like that. Leslie Nielsen was arguably the most popular comic actor in America in the early 90s, partially because and this is sort of touches on a theme we've talked about before, he was actually a great dramatic actor who then they cast him in these series of movies called The Naked Gun, and he was in the show called The Police
already
Squad.
like 70.
He was already 70, and he just basically, they're like the silliest movie. It's like silly in a way that like they don't make anything like that anymore, probably because it's, got kind of old after a while. But and then he just delivers all the lines with just like very straight-faced, very grave, in a way that when I was a child was absolutely hilarious. Those movies co-star O.J. Simpson, which is complex now looking back, but
The
I don't
original
know the other guy so well, George Kennedy.
I just want to say the original Police Squad television series, which only had like 4 or 6 episodes or something.
yeah, it's not a lot.
It's like joke for joke one of the funniest things anybody has ever made, and it's because they do this stuff that is so silly and stupid with such straight faces that it works, because the people on the show are good enough actors to do it. Much in the way only the Undertaker only works because they do it with a straight enough face that it works.
And even though it's like silly and a lot of very groan-inducing sort of humor, I have to say, like, American humor is one thing we're not great at, is silliness. It's hard for us to be silly and not be either stupid or overly crass. Yeah. I think. And those, once again, I have not seen these movies in 20 years, so it's possible that I would watch them and be like, oh wow, these are garbage. But I'm pretty sure that they must be ageless in some way, because
least
like
the
also
first
like
one.
the bits, it was all gags and wordplay. Like it wasn't like based on anything. I don't know. I actually now kind of want to go back and rewatch some of them. I should.
And just his reactions to things, like the bit they
Yes.
do at the very end where they find the briefcase, and George Kennedy's like, the case is closed. And like the whole, it's like, oh, this is stupid. But then when Leslie Nielsen turns to the camera and is like, the case is closed, it's hilarious.
He doesn't even say it like that. He doesn't say it like he's incredulous. He says it very matter of fact, as though they finally solved the mystery. The case is closed.
Like, this is good enough for him, yeah.
I like the shot backstage of them going in different directions where it says Undertaker Trail and the arrow's pointing both ways.
Right. Stuff like that.
I missed if that got brought up. If it did,
No,
I'm
no,
sorry.
it
But
didn't.
that was it was a great visual.
Oh, man.
So, super sleuths aside, Paul Bearer, he's denying that the $1 Million Man's Undertaker is the Undertaker. Well, first, there's one confrontation where Bearer holds up the urn, and DiBiase's Undertaker starts to move towards it, but then DiBiase pulls out a wad of cash, and
More money
goes towards him instead.
I loved how it was like two Undertakers, one fueled by cash, the other fueled by death.
Right, exactly. And they say death and taxes are the two certainties in life, right? So, but at this point they sell it like Paul Bearer's like, oh well, if he chose the money over the urn, it must not be the real Undertaker. I'm gonna go find the real Undertaker. So we get to SummerSlam. We get this entrance. So the guy who played the fake Undertaker was Brian Lee, who was actually Mark Calloway, the real Undertaker's best man at his wedding.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
So I guess they spent, they were good friends. They spent a lot of time together because Brian Lee, at least for the basics, I thought did a really good job at getting Undertaker's mannerisms down to the point where looking at him just coming out on his own, you're like, oh, he kind of looks like the Undertaker.
And his theme song is like the Undertaker's theme song at 70% coolness.
Right. Well, it was the old Undertaker theme song.
Oh,
and then
okay.
When he comes back, he debuts with the new remix.
That makes more sense.
And
Was
the new
he a wrestler
purple-
in other way? Like, I mean, had he been in other stuff, Brian Lee?
Brian Lee on the indies. Eventually, he got a regular role in WWF as the biker Chains of the Disciples of Apocalypse faction. But so I just wanted to say, so we get his entrance, then Paul Bearer comes out with the casket and the extra big urn that has a flashlight in it for some reason. And then we get the Undertaker returning in the purple with the new music. And instead of raising the lights slowly with his hands, he just sticks them out to the side really quickly and the lights come on. My main point here is that Brian Lee looks like he's doing a pretty good job of being the Undertaker until he's standing next to the real Undertaker. Yeah. And then it's like, oh no, actually he's nothing like the Undertaker at all.
So I want to ask Evan, as someone who's not as familiar with all of this as us, was it obvious to you once they stood in the ring and were face to face which one the real one was?
Oh yeah. I mean, I thought that they did a really, really good job of making them look the same, and they have similar builds, nigh identical butts, but they but yeah, you could just immediately tell. I mean, their bone structure is slightly different. Like even hiding their face. I also just kind of assumed that the first one was not going to be the real Undertaker. And
Undertaker's also a few inches taller.
If I were a kid and weren't so into the detail of their appearances, and even I was just a kid watching, the first Undertaker, Underfaker as he gets called now, is the term that gets used for him. Undertaker, fake Undertaker comes out, walks out of his own accord, and then the second Undertaker comes out via mythical urn resurrection with the full casket entrance. I mean, that's the giveaway right there.
The casket opens and he's not in it, but the new double wide, double deep urn is.
I wanted to see that part of the board meeting where someone, probably Vince, was like,
Vince, yes.
We need a big urn. a really big urn.
So all this spectacle, and then there's the match.
The match, again, Brian Lee tries really hard to be the Undertaker, but he's just not the fucking Undertaker.
There was one feat in the match that I was very impressed by, which is it's fairly early on. They're doing the the run of Irish whips or whatever you call it, when one guy hits the ropes and then runs back, and then they either go under or go over, and the Undertaker leaps over Brian Lee at one point, which at first I was like, oh, I've seen that before, and then I was like, damn, these guys are both 6'10". Jesus, he just did a straight up 6 foot vertical leap over this dude.
Yep.
But yeah, other than that, the match was not very interesting.
I thought the best part was when they took off their hats simultaneously.
Yes, that was
perfect.
They nailed that.
Perfectly fucking choreographed. I loved it.
Brian Lee did an excellent job playing The Undertaker. I think that's the best way to properly put it. Right. The problem with this match wasn't that he was doing poorly or that The Undertaker was doing poorly. The whole conceit of the match is that both of these guys are a very slow, methodical character, and neither of them sell anything. And The Undertaker works as a character in the ring well because it can contrast with anything else. It's not contrasting with itself. Andre the Giant was one of the biggest draws of all time in wrestling. People would come from far and wide to pack arenas to see Andre the Giant. I wouldn't want to see Andre the Giant versus another Andre the Giant because it takes...
Oh, absolutely not, no.
And especially not versus Giant Gonzalez.
And especially not versus Giant Gonzalez, right. It takes what's special about Andre and completely negates it because now he doesn't have it. Neither of them would have a size advantage. Neither of them would be able to do their moves where they demonstrate their weight advantage. It's just... they'll plod into each other, and that's kind of what happened here. There was so much circus surrounding this angle, which was way over, that the match kind of sucked.
It's just so slow and plodding. Within 5 minutes, I'm just like, okay, they're not doing anything.
The finish was great, though.
Yeah.
That was the first time I'd ever seen the tombstone reversal, and they did it absolutely perfectly. Him sticking his arms out to the side first, and then getting up. And then the idea that the Undertaker's like, no, he needs 3 tombstones before I'm going to put him down.
And it was really impressive to... hold on, wait, let me wait for these sirens to stop. It was really impressive to how, they start wrestling, and I was like, God, it's got to be really hard to wrestle with your hair in your face like that. And they keep their hair in the face for the whole match, and you only get a clear shot of the Undertaker's face at the very end when he pins him and flips his hair up and looks directly into the camera with the whites of his eyes. And I was like, that's fucking theater right there. That's amazing. The problem is that the match, not only is the match not good, but following that intro, unless they pulled off an absolute masterpiece, there's no fucking way. There's no way it would have lived up to it because that is the best introduction to a match I've ever seen.
I like
hands down.
Vince saying the crowd is in a stunned silence. It's no, they're bored. You know what happened right before this match? Yeah, it's true though.
No, it is. Totally.
No, they're bored. The crowd just goes they are asleep.
Directly before this match, this is the last match on the show. Directly before this match was Bret Hart versus Owen Hart in a steel cage match that went half an hour, had a lot of great drama for the World Wrestling Federation Championship. And then, after seeing that classic, they spent 15 minutes watching a bunch of guys take the cage down. And then
they watched this whole thing. I wanted to say this is a real testament to how over The Undertaker was and how, despite not really being in the title picture, he was, showcased as one of their top stars. This pay-per-view, SummerSlam 94, and the next pay-per-view, where Undertaker finally gets his revenge against Yokozuna, those 2 matches were the main events over Bret Hart's title matches at both of these 2 pay-per-views. And they didn't do that very often at that time. By the way, that second Undertaker-Yokozuna casket match from Survivor Series also features Chuck Norris.
There's
and I wasn't going to make you watch 2
Yes.
Undertaker-Yokozuna casket matches, but...
No, one was enough, thank you.
One was enough, but it might be worth checking. I mean, you do get to see Chuck Norris kick Jeff Jarrett.
The idea is he's an outside of the ring enforcer to stop Yoko's goons from coming in.
It was the goons, hired goons.
It was a big cross promotion with the USA Network that was showing Walker, Texas Ranger right before Raw.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So there you have it. The beginning of all of that with the Undertaker, the Undertaker's legend rising. This is all kind of tells a story. Like he finally does vanquish Yokozuna at Survivor Series, and he has to move on to other things. And they eventually do start putting him in, higher profile. I know it's a world title match, how much higher profile, but actual higher profile things within the next couple of years.
I mean, he keeps getting derailed. Like he gets derailed by Mabel, and then by after Mabel, it's the whole $1 Million Corporation. First, he has to fight off the $1 Million Corporation up until WrestleMania 11, and then he gets derailed by Mabel. And all these people, they just keep him away from the title picture. And it's not until WrestleMania 13, really, where he finally gets that world title. He had it once before, really, really early in his run as the Undertaker.
A year in.
And
it was at Survivor Series the year after he debuted. He beats Hulk Hogan.
Well, I was going to say, we're going to show you.
Yeah, well, you just said he won the title. I'm presuming he's not going to win the title in a match where he loses to Hulk Hogan.
Right.
But yeah, so, but that was earlier.
But they took that off of him immediately.
Yeah,
he only had it for like 3 days, I think.
I gotta say, here's my meta problem with the Undertaker so far. This is both with these 3 matches, and I think we've watched maybe 3 or 4 other Undertaker matches over the course of this podcast, something like that. Is that so the character is amazing. When the matches are good, they're great. But today, 2 of these matches sucked. At the end of the day, putting aside me trying to have an open mind and trying to not be too negative or anything like that, 2 of the matches in here, the wrestling was just fucking nothing to look at. Even if he's technically good, if the match sucks, I'm like, why am I fucking doing this?
But that was what was so amazing about his character, is his matches all sucked for years.
Yeah.
He doesn't really have great matches until much later. We'll show you.
Oh, there's some amazing matches coming up.
Great. But up until then, I actually really liked the match with Yokozuna.
Well, no,
the
that
Yoko
one
match
was good. The
was
other
good.
2 were trash, but I thought
otherwise,
that was a good match.
They put him up against these talentless freak shows month after month, and he was just so awesome that we didn't care that his matches sucked. It just really didn't matter.
It wasn't the slot on the show for the really good match. We had Bret Hart as champion. He was going to have a 25-minute wrestling classic, and then elsewhere on the show, The Undertaker would fight the monster of the month or whatever in the, 3-ring circus, as you put it, freak show match. But he could do better. And that brings us back to how anybody else in his position would have failed pretty promptly.
Yes.
But he could do it. There's a quote Bret Hart said once that Undertaker came up to him when they did a European tour and they were matched against each other, I believe both as baby faces. And he said that Taker would come up to him really excited and said, "I'm really excited for a match tonight. I'm finally going to be able to show them that I'm better than what I've been doing." And he did.
And we're going to watch one of those matches with Bret for the premium. So.
I'm looking forward to it. And you're right that it is a testament to the power of his character that the 2 trash matches that we watched today, if it had been Diesel, right, and there hadn't been all of the character stuff and all the cool fanfare, I would have shut the matches off and lied to you guys about finishing them. But because of the power of the Undertaker, I was just like, oh, these matches aren't very good, and just still kind of sailed through them to the end because based on his charisma. It's like when there's an actor that you really love in a movie that sucks, and you're just like, oh, but But this guy's here, so it's all I'm gonna feel good and comforted no matter what.
The Undertaker does have a match with Diesel at WrestleMania 12, shortly before Diesel leaves the company. I was thinking about this when I was going over his WrestleMania opponents because they made such a big deal eventually of his unbeaten streak. It was years before the Undertaker faced anybody at WrestleMania that was still in the company the next year. The first person he faced at WrestleMania that was in the company the next year is at WrestleMania 14 when he faced Kane. Yeah.
Wow, yeah, that is a long time.
Snuka was out. Roberts was out. Gonzalez was out. He skipped WrestleMania 10. King Kong Bundy was out. Diesel was out. Sid was out. Kane.
Yeah, wow.
All right, final thoughts? We good? We got pretty much all of it?
I think so.
I think we're good.
This was the Undertaker that, Doc and I grew up loving. And all of his success later on is rooted in how well he established that character during these early years.
Agreed. I'm looking forward. I'm looking forward to doing the other ones. I mean,
Hard
this guy.
agree.
And then you'll see how he had all this longevity because he was able to evolve that character over the years. And that's what we're going to see.
It does almost feel like he's cheating sometimes. Just like the character is so cool. Just like the fact, it's like, oh, you get to be Death. Okay, all right. Like, I guess I guess I'll be the IRS guy, but you can be Death. Like,
One funny anecdote about that, he talked about this on the Broken Skull sessions with Steve Austin, where he was like, for the weeks leading up to his debut, they kept showing this big egg on TV, which ended up being the Gobbledygooker, which was this like turkey themed mascot.
It's like a guy in a big old turkey suit. It was funny for
really
about a
stupid.
week. It was not very good. Yeah.
But so he's seeing this big egg on TV and he knows he's coming in, but he doesn't know what his character is going to be yet. And he's like, fuck, they're going to make me the Eggman. He was totally convinced he was going to have to shave his head and just go out there and be Eggman. And he was getting ready for it. That's how much of a professional he was. It's like he was going to kill this fucking Eggman concept. But thankfully,
has there ever been
Undertaker.
a wrestler known as the Eggman?
Not that I know of yet.
Not yet. I'm thinking. I don't think so.
That one's for free, listeners.
Yes.
Yeah.
I know some of you are wrestlers.
There was Egghead in the 60s Batman.
Yes.
Okay,
that's what
well,
he was
that's
thinking.
not what I asked, is it? So
Maybe he made an
Thanks.
appearance on Memphis TV at some point. Who knows?
This has been Contesting Wrestling. Listeners, if you enjoyed this episode and you would like to hear more of our banter, you should check us out on Patreon, patreon.com/contestingwrestling, where once a week we put out a whole other episode for $5 a month. If you don't want to do the whole $5 a month, but you would like to support us, we have a $1 tier where you don't get access to the premium episodes, but you do get access to these main feed episodes a couple weeks in advance. You should hit us up on Twitter at ContestingW. Let us know how you feel about things. If you are listening to us on a platform that allows liking, rating, subscribing, etc., you should do that and leave a review that's positive if you like it. And if you want to leave a negative review, that's what Twitter's for. Just send us hate mail on Twitter. You don't have to inscribe it into, the forever into eternity with like Apple Podcast bad reviews or anything.
Send the hate mail to Evan. He officially deals with all of our hate.
Yeah, actually, yeah, just Evan Burke, etc., Evan Burke, etc., Twitter for any of the hate mail relating to Contesting Wrestling. I will not care. It'll be glorious.
The wonders of Twitter.
Exactly. Alrighty, this has been Contesting Wrestling. Thank you so much, everybody. We appreciate you. We love you.
I love you.
Rest in peace.
Oh.
I think we're done.